Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Nice,
Yes.
nice. So, yeah, nice. Hi everyone again. My name is Oleksandr Khivrych, and let me introduce myself a bit more. So, I'm a senior front-end engineer at Beamery, and have kind of 9 years of experience in engineering. And if something about myself, I like traveling, I like cycling, and interesting fact about me that over the last 4 years, I was building micro-frontend for different organizations. And it's basically a success story. So that's why I decided to have this talk and talk about the model federation for distributed frontends. Okay. So before we go to the exact topic, to the model federation, I would like to provide a bit more context. Let's start with definition of the micro-frontends. So micro-frontends architecture is a design approach in which your front-end application can be decomposed into smaller micro application, which work loosely together. They are semi-independent. So the same like with microservices, you can split your API by the different services, your business logic by different services. The same with micro-frontends. If you have, for instance, a couple pages inside your website, like profile page and I don't know, dashboard, it can be two different micro applications. And it's actually inspired and made up after microservices. And with such approach, you can have a lot of benefits in your organization, starting from independent development. So teams are more focused on their subject areas, clear area of responsibility. Independent deployment allows teams to be more autonomous. So they not depend on the other team. So they can deploy each time independently. Shorter delivery cycle and incremental upgrades. So because you have such an independent, smaller application, for sure your build will be faster and test. And it will be much easier to add new functionality or do bug fix. Reduce complexity of your application. So separate parts are less to understand that large complex monolith, and for sure onboarding process will be much faster. Isolating errors. So it's also interesting benefit. For instance, if you have application split by the smaller micro application, that means that if it will be some error in the micro application, you can catch it. Catch this by the rest of the app will still running, still provide some value to your customers. And more granular monitoring and alerting. So you can have, for example, if you're using Sentry or some other technology for error tracking or monitoring front-end errors, you can catch these errors again in some separate parts, in some domain of your application, and specific team that owns this domain can work on it and fix it. But one thing that I would like you to understand, that microservices and micro-frontends, they are not similar at runtime. So in development, they are very similar. Different repositories or different projects in one repository. It's related to CI/CD process, different teams. But at runtime, they are not similar at all because in web browser, you have one monolithic runtime environment with general event loop, shared document object model with events, navigation, and many, many more global web API on the page. And to be honest, we just need to accept it that we should achieve some level of independence, but it will not be fully independent micro applications. Because if you will try to overcomplicate your front end, if you will try to isolate it completely, usually it can lead to many risks while architecting micro frontends approach in your organization. For example, in my experience, I started to do micro frontends when it wasn't any model federation. It wasn't enough tools to do it. And I also heard many stories from my colleagues from the other companies who implemented such approach. And Sometimes because of the poor architecture or limitation technologies, it can lead to the critical problems and risk. For example, poor code sharing methods. If you don't have solution for shared libraries and you load them every time in the runtime, and it will lead to the bad build and web performance. Divided our micro-frontends too finely. It's difficult to track of the shared components, harder to update. For instance, if you need to update some, I would say, feature to the production, but it's split by the 5 micro-frontends, and it's completely difficult to manage, so that you need to keep in your head that you need to update, instead 1 micro-frontend, you need to update 5 of them. And it's quite huge risk for organizations. So you should understand, not go too finely when you divide your micro-frontends. Overcomplicated communication between micro-frontends, big cognitive load, right? And it's difficult to support. For example, if you have even with micro-frontends, each micro-frontend has a isolated React DOM, for instance, and you have this event bus. Completely difficult to support when you have 100 events, and because there is no examples in the industry that we can follow, right? Problems with global libraries, again, like bad performance, not out of solution to have these shared libraries at runtime to manage them. Multi-frame. I'm sorry?
You mean like if one micro-frontend is using Angular and another one is using React, and you combine them on the page?
Yeah, exactly. By the way, I will try to finish my talk, and then we can have approximately 15 minutes for questions, right? But yeah, exactly. So multi-frame, when you have many libraries or frameworks for rendering your application at runtime, and it's a higher risk because you need to find developers who know Angular and React on the Vue instance. And if you're using design system library, you need to use some web components, for instance, to provide API for different frameworks and React apps. So basically, you don't need it. You need just one React application. And for sure, if it becomes legacy, you can have some migration plan. But to be honest, usually it's useless to have multi-framework support. And again, because of performance, you don't need to load many frameworks at runtime and React DOMs. And we need to avoid such a problem. There is one solution to follow the industry. What's used by the industry right now? So it's a modern model of Monolith in Monorepo. So what I'm talking about? So there are many boilerplates in the web, in the GitHub, where you have single React application set up with the NX monorepository, or you have Next.js with NX again, where you can put shared libraries and your team can collaborate with each other, right? And moreover, its low complexity is still React app, single React DOM, good performance, and you can do custom shared libraries to reuse them in monorepositories. So many benefits from such an approach that we can follow by the industry, that we will not overcomplicate, and it will be easy onboarding process, good performance, etc. So something simple, but it's still monolith, right? We have such limitation, like no independent builds, slow build process because we build all the time whole application. Problems with updating global dependencies. For instance, if you would like to update Lambda or some other library, you need to update it for whole application, which a bit slow down software delivery cycle. And no independent deployment. You all the time deploy one version of the whole monolith application. And to be honest, for most cases, like for average application and for the small application, maybe it's absolutely fine to accept it. You don't need such a benefits. But when your team growing, become much bigger, you probably need to solve such a limitation. And there is a solution. You can do it better with the model federation plugin. It's a killer feature in Webpack 5 that allows you to point models from other Webpack assembly that installed on different host. So basically, you can, if you use model federation, it enables you to import modules from different Webpack build, and this build may be on any CDN, any domain, which is cool, and it's exactly what we need. So if you go to the next slide, I would like to just pay your attention to a few concepts of model federation. So in model federation, each Webpack project, where you enable this plugin called container, and container can be host. That means that it consumes modules from another container, another application, another Webpack project. Also can be remote. It exposes some modules from another container, but it can be also simultaneously. It can be remote and host at the same time. For example, you export some modules to runtime execution and import some modules from another container as well. And one more thing, application is entry point of our website. So basically it's also container, but it's something that we load firstly, such as index.html and index.js, like kind of entry point of our website. And this is quite complicated overview of model federation, but few concepts that I would like to pay attention is there's some interesting logic under the hood when you expose some models and import some. Before import the model, model federation shared scope and see if it's model already at runtime. If not, it will go to container references which provide models for our application from another container, and then we'll add them to the shared scope, and they will be available globally for whole application. The same logic with the shared dependencies. For example, you have React.js, and when you start executing your application, your container model, it will see, oh, there is import of React.js. That means that I need to go to the shared scope, check, here is some React.js model. If there is no, I will load it from the container and then put it to shared scope only once, which lead to the good web performance. And there is also version check at runtime. So for instance, if you update from the Lambda package or some other package to another version, you be able to have few versions of your package at runtime by model federation. So we need just to specify exact version of package that we would like to use at runtime, and model federation will handle it. Also, interesting point is that it's really important when you're choosing some technology to have a good community. Companies that use model federation, the popular one like Netflix, Microsoft, Amazon, Indeed, Sony, Reddit, and many more, which is really nice for community, and you can also find answer for your questions. But let's go to theoretical example. Imagine you have federated React application with single React DOM tree. As you can see on this image, you have three different applications: shell, container application, order container, and dashboard container. And all of these containers split by the team, so it's almost by the different team. Moreover, we have dependencies, which is global for all our containers. All logic to load dependencies handled by model federation. As you can see, each container provides some model. For instance, shell provides shell service, order container provides order service and recent order widget, and dashboard container provide dashboard service. And on this diagram, you can see that I can import in shell two pages, order service and dashboard service. It's two different pages that would like to render at runtime when I go to the different roles, for instance, dashboard and orders. Moreover, I would like to reuse some global functionality from the shell in our applications like order container and dashboard. I just do regular import. And I would like to reuse in dashboard application widget from the order container, which we call recent order widget. Again, I do just simple ECMAScript import. There are a few points here. So we can do asynchronous import, or you can do sync import. So the same like you're using React Lazy, for instance, you can use your usual dynamic import or just a sync import. Everything can be handled by Modular Federation, as you can see here. So it's pretty familiar to you because it's just a single React application, but they split by the different project. And to enable this feature, you just need to add to your build config, to your webpack config, 3 different files with different configurations. So it's a Modular Federation plugin that you need to add the webpack config in the shell. And we specify that libraries that we like to reuse at runtime. We have some remotes that we consume. And the same with pools, but here we specify the expose. And we just use it at runtime, just do the regular import. But to be honest, let's basically do the demo. Okay, so I'm going to show my VS Code. Here I try to use samples, and I found really excited one that we was talking previously. For instance, we have a dashboard and order page here, and we have shell. And as you can see, it's a monorepository and split by the different project micro applications. Each project has webpack config. Let's go to the shell. Here we can see some webpack config configuration, which we will not pay attention on. The most important part for us is this configuration. It's actually Modular Federation plugin configuration. So I need to specify name of container. I need to specify my remote entry. Remote entry is something, once you load it, it's kind of manifest for your remote container. So if you would like to reuse some modules from other container, you need to provide remote entry. And remotes. And here you specify containers which you would like to consume modulars from. For example, I would like to consume modulars from module container and dashboard. And I need to specify this URL to remote entry to be able to load remote entry in flight and then be able to import any modules from this container. And one interesting fact, here you can use promise new promise feature in Webpack and be able to have this URL at runtime and import it from the window, which is exactly what we want. But for this particular example, I decided to hard code it. If you go to dashboard page, the same configuration, but the different name and list of the remotes. As you can see, we would like to have be able to import some model from the order container. And if you go to the order, the same logic here. So I specify container name, I specify remote entry, my manifest, and remotes. In this case, it's shell. And let's take a look what we have at runtime. So I have this example. It's my dashboard page that I was showing you previously. So let's take a look at the order of this loading the JavaScript bundles. So as you can see on the port 4000, we have main.js file, which is actually our shell application. It's our entry point. Then we need to load remote entry for our shell application as well, like a manifest. Then, as you can see, I have material UI here, and everything loaded dynamically, like a lazy load, because actually, if you go to the shell, I will show you. If you go to the shell, you can see that I'm using material, and Modular Federation, we see that you're using material React and React DOM, and we'll mark it like a global shared libraries, and we'll load it automatically at runtime. And yeah, moreover, like I said, there's React DOM, everything loaded and like a shared libraries at runtime. But because I render here dashboard page also, I also load dashboard page from the different port, from the different application, different URL, where my dashboard application hosted, my container. Like as shown in the config, I specified exact URL to it. But to load it, I just do regular import, nothing new for us that we do in our single page application. And they're just using the suspense and render it. But as you can see, on the dashboard, I have recent orders widget. That's why I need to import another micro frontend model from another port where my orders container hosted. In the production, it might be just a different path in the CDN. And everything works nice. And as you can see, it's just a single React DOM tree, good performance, no duplication of shared libraries. If I go to another page, for example, order page, as you can see, I don't load any other necessary models, shared dependencies, because they're already at runtime. And I just loaded only one chunk that needed to render this list, this orders page. When I go back, again, no model is loaded because they're already in shared scope, which is cool. You can find this example in Model Federation examples repository. And it's such an interesting approach, provides us many benefits and less problems. But what about server-side support? Actually, it's a good question. And previously, and currently, there is some plugin which they call Next.js MF and Next.js SSRMF for Next.js support. So if you are talking about server-side, I think it does make sense to talk about the Next.js because it's the most popular framework with SSR support. And they actually provide a solution, but this solution is currently inside the private registry. So we need to pay subscription to be able to download this package. But after a couple months, they decided to release all the work related to the server side and Next.js to open source. And it's currently available. However, SSR support is still in progress. They're preparing pull requests for it. And very shortly, it will be available in the NPM. But I had the chance to access to this private registry, and I'm going to show you a demo of the SSR support as well. But before we go to this demo, I would like to show you another example. So this looks familiar. Different teams, different teams, shared dependencies, but right now it's all works on the server side and on the client side as well. So the same, we have different containers, all these containers handled and owned by the different teams. For instance, checkout container provide few modules. The same with the shop container, it's provide one module shop page. Checkout provide as well title, kind of widget we can reuse in any application. And checkout, it's our checkout application. And host, it's our home page. And as you can see, we, as usual, using the regular import, everything handled by Model Federation at runtime, which is cool. But let's go to the exact demo, and I will show you the code example. So I have another example here, and I have access to the Next.js SSR, and I'm going to show it. So in this Model Federation example repository, we have Next.js SSR, but it's only available to run if you have access to this private registry, but I have one. So here you have 3 different Next.js applications. That's why you have different and separate Next.js config. To add Model Federation feature, you just need to use Model Federation Next.js MF package, and then just to add new configuration to your Webpack inside Next.js config. Again, pretty familiar to us. We need to specify name of the container, file name for the remote entry, and expose models that we would like to share to other containers. And this example for the shop page, as you can see, shop page expose shop container expose shop page. Let's go to the home, for instance. The same logic, but here, as you can see, different name and different expose. It's expose some global components. And the most important part is consume remotes from the different containers, from the home itself, shop, and checkout. And the same logic in the checkout Next.js config, what we expose and what we consume. And I'm going to show you working example. So this is actually the example. So here we have 3 pages. Our home page, which is hosted on the 3000. And on the home page, we have text, we have navigation, and we have some widget from checkout title, which is hosted on separate Next.js instance. And if we do refresh, as you can see here on the preview tab, you see it's all rendered on the server side. But the interesting thing that my checkout rendered on the different port and the different domain, for instance. But server side works. So the model federation using the streams, software streams, to load our software chunks at runtime on the server side as well. Then return result to the client, and we hydrate all of the server side response. And as you can see here as well, it's single React DOM tree. And once we render it and load our entry point JavaScript file, we do the same logic like I showed previously with our regular model federation plugin on the client side. It's needed for be able to hydrate this logic on the to be able to hydrate it to make this page interactive. And then when you go to the shop page, right now, client-side rendering enabled, and we again load some chunk from the different domain, this one, for instance, this shop page, and render it here. But if we refresh the page, server-side support still there. It will do the same logic on the backend, send you HTML, then do hydration on frontend, and client-side rendering will be also enabled. And if you go to the checkout, the same logic. And we can even use get initial props or get server-side props function to be able to do some fetching to the API or connect to the database. And it's a really interesting approach on the server side. However, open source, like I said, is still in progress, open source work, and it will be released pretty soon to be able to use server-side logic. And I believe it will maybe really popular because it's enable Vue to be independent, to implement microservices, micro-frontend architecture in Next.js application. Many benefits, but we'll see. I believe it will be really popular. We'll see how federated team, model federation team will finish this work with Next.js support with server side. The only one thing when you share some code on the server side, you for sure need to think about security. You need to have some VPN or some protected routes to isolate your chunks, which is available only on the server side. This does make sense. And also interesting news from the Vercel. So I was watching Next.js conference, and they introduced Turbo Pack, which will be in the future. It will be replacement of Webpack So it's another challenge for Mod Federation team to implement such a plugin for the Turbo Pack, which is based on the Rust. But to be honest, I already raised the issue in GitHub and asked Zach, who is creator of Mod Federation, are you going to solve this problem? And he said it's not a problem. It's pretty similar architecture under the hood of the Rust, because it's all the project, leading project is by Tobias, who is creator of the Webpack. So it will be quite easy to implement such a concept for the Turbo Pack as well. So yeah, and that's all, guys. That's all, guys. And let's ask some questions, and I will try to answer them. Let's start with the question and answers. So what do you mean about general event loop? I mean, then JavaScript is single thread. And when you run your code in the web browser, you're using the one event loop. If you're not using the workers, right? It's a one event loop. So that's why I said that the micro-frontends and microservices, they are not completely similar, because, for instance, your microservice can be running in the separate Node.js environment in the separate process. With micro-frontends, it's different. Everything running in the same window, using the same event loop. This is an answer. Can you share a remote open position related to Vue.js and Python REST API? I can't understand this question. Maybe there is some clarification. Okay, let's go to the next question. How does dashboard service avail the recent order widget? Like in dashboard container, dashboard application, you specify modification config with list of the remotes. And exactly at this point of time, you specify that I'm going to use some modules from another remote, from the orders remote container. And that's all. Then you can import any modules from this container, and everything will be handled by Mod Federation, because you specify this config. If you would like to specify this URL where you would like to load initial manifest for your container, for your remote container, to be able to load other modules, you need to use promise new promise to specify this URL at runtime. For instance, you have a couple environments, staging, production, or something similar. That's why you need to specify this URL at runtime. Or you have some app running locally, or some app coming from the CDN. That's why you need to also use this promise new promise feature. You can find it inside the documentation. I'm going to send you right now.
Yeah, can you share the link for this new feature which you're talking about?
Yeah. We call it promise-based dynamic remotes. So that means that you not hardcode the full URL. You can use some promise function that you can load it at runtime. Next question. What remotes will be in the browser? Yeah, rendering of those remotes, if it's Next.js, if you do initial load, it will be on the server side. It will be on the server side, but then once you load initial HTML, it will be guide rated by React, and then it will be our usual client-side rendering logic, so it will be loaded on the website. But when you use it on the server side, initial load will be for sure on the server side to be able to generate this HTML. And it will be pretty exciting about the future. As you can see in the React, they have server streaming, server components, API that Vercel already using in the alpha, I guess, server components. So for Next.js, so we'll see what will be the next steps of such a pattern. What's the biggest problem with MF you faced? The biggest problem, to be honest, initial implementation of micro-front architecture was without MF, and this was a problem. But right now, I don't have a lot of problems with it, because most of stuff handled by the MF. But the one thing that you should understand that when you creating such a solution, micro-frontend solution, MF is just a tool that helps you to enable it, to have a good performance, to be able to load containers, share dependencies, but you should do nice architecture. You should split your application by modules correctly. And yeah, this one thing. The second thing related to the model federation is that each time when you build your container, every shared modules and modules that packages like global libraries, they will go to your build. And then when you have some versioning, for instance, some unique version in your CDN path, each time it may invalidate the cache. So the solution for it, specifically for shared libraries, to not invalidate the cache each time, to be able to access it from the cache, because you didn't change the library, you changed just the application code. So what do you need? You need to have some separate path, like staging, production, development, and copy this version of the bundle of your container to a specific environment, for instance. Then it will solve the problem of invalidating cache, something like this. Yeah, this is kind of problem that I was facing in the previously, but you can send me a message on Twitter as well, and we can, if you have more questions. So another question is, are there similar plugins for modification if you're using something other than Webpack? Yes, exactly. There is pretty exciting announcement about native federation. That means they actually federation team, they're going to create, they already published better version of the native federations. And at the hood, they're using ESM modules and import maps that provide feature parity for all bundles, actually. So you can use it with ES build, you can use it with rollup, and you can use it with white together. So there is a lot of examples with such a native federations, but it's currently in beta, I guess. So I would not use it for the production, but just to test it, provide some feedback. It's nice to try, but in the future, for sure, it will be you will be able to use it in production, and it's cool because it will be less logic inside the Webpack, no Webpack, faster builds, and feature parity for all the other bundlers. Yeah, and then I saw many examples, not official plugins for rollup as well, and for a few other bundlers as well. So, but it's not official examples. Okay. Is the container? No, container is not related to Docker. It's just container is your separate Webpack project that using model federation. In model federation terminology, it's container that can consume modules and expose modules. Was able to get Next.js working as the host container. Had subrouting with React container pulling the next page. Yes, regarding the subrouting of Next.js MF, I'm going to show you one example. So when you have subrouting, for instance, in home page, you need to use this structure that's provided by Next.js. So in Next.js framework, you're using the pages directory, and then you should structure it by your roles. For instance, you have Slack, you should use this syntax is if you have some exact page /checkout, you should have checkout.js file, the same with the shop. And here you need to do dynamic import, use get initial props, and inject your page. Yeah, this is currently the only one approach because Next.js have specific rules that you need to have pages to be able to do routing. And I guess if you have some sub-routing inside the checkout page, it's an interesting question. I think if you have sub-routing in further, I never tried previously, but it might be the same logic. You need to create maybe in another directory. In the index file, it will be this logic. In the separate file, it will be another module that you import from another container. So yeah, but I guess, like I said, it's something that came out recently. It's a new approach of developing micro-frontends with Next.js, and I'm very excited about it. Looks like we have 3 minutes left, guys. Any other questions? You can turn on your microphone and ask me any questions. Meanwhile, guys. Meanwhile, I would love to share my article. It's mostly related to the concept of model federation. It's related mostly for the React-based apps. And yeah, so this article is about model federation. I posted it to my company engineering blog, and you have kind of link to previous article from another colleague about our history of micro-frontends, and then you can read this current article that I shared with you about model federation, federated approach, why it's so cool, and there is some example links, useful links, few answers to your questions there as well. So I really highly recommend you, if you're going to start working with model federation, to get a context, start reading my article. Highly recommend. Do you have a favorite front-end frameworks? I think, for me, pretty comfortable to work with React.js. I have experience with other frameworks, but what I like about React.js is that you can build any flexible solution. So basically React.js is not a framework, it's a library. So you can build specific solution for specific problem. You can all the time migrate to any structure, which is cool. But maybe it's a bit more complexity, it's a bit more risk that you can poorly architect something. So yeah, my favorite is React.js, but we'll see what will be in the future. And I think the base knowledge, how you architect software, how you know JavaScript, how you know maybe some algorithms in front end, provide you possibility to make a transition to any other frameworks. But what I see currently is React is the most popular one. Yeah. Yeah, React is library. Exactly. So if you're talking about the frameworks, again, I think Next.js, it's a really nice option because there is it's React framework for server-side and client-side rendering, killer feature like incremental server rendering. What else? Static rendering, server-side rendering, client-side rendering, all supported from scratch. Huge API for images, for responsive images. What else? Basic infrastructure for the routing and all the stuff. It works pretty nice, pretty fast, and then it's easy to onboard new people. You can just go to the Next.js documentation, which is really nice. Yeah, I like Next.js, to be honest. Yeah. Do you have any tips for managing complexity as the project? Yeah, tips for managing complexity. Like I said previously, sometimes you don't need micro-frontends, but you can prepare yourself to migrate to micro-frontends, to add, for instance, model federation. For example, you can start when you start your application from scratch, do scaffolding, or when you have existing one. Anyway, try to split your application in the monolith and have a modular monolith, especially with an Next.js or Turbo repo. It will be so cool because you have this caching support, parallel caching support, remote caching support, which will speed up your delivery time. But if you split your application by modules, for example, it's your way to choose by domains, by roles, by some components, what you're comfortable for, like what your organization needed currently. Some major features you decide. And you shouldn't go too finely when you divide your applications, popular problem when you're trying to architect micro-frontends. So try to just start splitting by domains, then maybe by roles, then maybe by some major features, and see how does it work. We will have kind of independent development, but it's still monolith. But when you see it's not enough for you, add model federation to your application. So this is an answer. Okay, guys, I see that we're already out of time. Do you have maybe some last question, and we can finish this talk? I would like to say thank you guys to having me today, for attention, and thank you guys. Yeah, thank you guys for your questions, and also thank you Codementor for having me today on this amazing meetup and talk. Domain drive development for micro-frontends. It's interesting. I think it's I don't know existing solution. I think for domain drive development, you just need to use kind of model federation, split your application correctly regarding domain drive developer pattern, and do it from scratch. Regarding backend, I'm not sure about the solution. Maybe Nest.js provides such a pattern. Maybe there is some model for it, but generally I know people implement them from scratch. Yeah, the same for the micro frontend. But again, you should ask your question: do you need DDD or not? Will it overcomplicate your project or make it easy to maintain? You need to answer this question. Basically, the question why you need it, right? If you answer the question why, and you show that you actually need this pattern, go for it. So thank you guys. Thank you for your attention. And by the way, I'm going to send link to my Twitter as well. Free to subscribe and send me any message if you would like to ask something about model federation. Yeah, and for sure, link to my personal blog. Bye, guys.